Even when we were campaigning against the ANC during the campaign, but we knew there is one matter outstanding that we must resolve. Reconciliation between the two political parties, but especially between members of the two political parties, because there are areas where people say, I do not want to see the posters of this political party because they killed my parents. Both sides. Out of 20,000 people who died, 12,000 was IFP, 8,000 was ANC. Now,
so in what is being slowly interpreted by the Inkatha Freedom Party, IFP, as an opportunity to reconcile with the ANC and also the wider South Africa, IFP party boss Velenkosini Hlabisa is actually explaining in this video why the IFP chose to take part in the government of national unity and why he has confidence in the government of national unity to restore South Africa to where it rightly belongs amongst the Committee of Nations. Let's listen to what Hlabisa has to say about this, and I'll be back on some interesting analysis on the event that caused a deep fracas between the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Party in South Africa's history.
Mr. Hlabisa, I know you and Mr. Hlengwa were heading the process of reconciliating with the ANC. You were tried to last year. So now that you're going to start working together in the province, is that something that you could start going back to the table for again?
You said I was not happy.
No, I'm saying I know the IFP and the ANC were in the process of reconciliation.
Oh, okay. Now, definitely, so this presents an important opportunity between the two political parties to heal the wounds of the past, which do not mean coming together as one political party. It remains an outstanding item. Even when we were campaigning against the ANC during the campaign, but we knew there is one matter outstanding that we must resolve. Reconciliation between the two political parties, but especially between members of the two political parties, because there are areas where people say, I do not want to see the posters of this political party because they killed my parents. Both sides. Out of 20,000 people who died, 12,000 was IFP, 8,000 was ANC. Now, it took two to tango. We have a responsibility. This might be an opportunity of grace from God that you work together, talk about outstanding issues so that our children, we close this chapter. We enter into a new phase in our country where we have reconciled the unfortunate past.
Nobody say again from Newsroom Africa. But Hlabisa, I asked about the meeting with the NFP this morning that you speak of, because it would seem the NFP President Ivan Barnes was at a meeting with former President Jacob Zuma this afternoon. There's photos that are doing the rounds. Are you aware of this? And I also want to find out, has the framework that will guide the GNU been finalized between the parties that will be taking part, and are you at liberty to share what this framework is? Thank you.
The IFP does not believe that we must use the national and provincial elections to settle scores at a local government level. Because the truth of the matter, the voters of South Africa went to the polling stations to vote for a provincial and national government, not a local government. The IFP's view is any issue that deals with a local government should be attended separately. Let me just make a practical example for you. In Tswane, you know, the Action SA had issues but said it will remain in Tswane because it's a different sphere of government which can be engaged at a later stage. And it is our hope and belief that we are not going to use the outcomes of 2024 to fix our problems of 2021. If we come to a particular understanding in 2024 to work together, the next level should be, can we take the same spirit to address issues outstanding dating back to 2021? Because just imagine, there are many municipalities which are hung in South Africa and come to KwaZulu-Natal. If a political party that is not comfortable to be part of the provincial government can say, if your IFP becomes part of the provincial government with a particular party, we are pulling out at a local government level. Doing so, really, for the lack of a better word, but with every respect, will be abusing the decision made by the people of South Africa. We feel we need to separate things. Lastly, people who understand the coalitions in Germany. In Germany, you will find a coalition arrangement at a local government different to the alignment at a provincial government, and also different at the alignment at a national level. People do not say, because we are in an agreement to govern together at a national level, so it must do so in all other spheres, because people voted differently. Combining different elections and use them as a bargain, we just pray that we respect the will demonstrated on 29 May, and other issues can follow. I think I can end there on that question. Nobuhle, you're coming back on the issue of the president of the NFP. In this morning, the president of the NFP, Mr. Barnes, was present in that meeting. There is nothing that prevents the president of the NFP, after the meeting of the IFP ANC-DA, to go and meet Ubaba Umsholozi. Equally, the IFP, despite of the meeting that collapsed, we are still open to engage with the MK. There is nothing wrong, because you know what? To take our country going forward, we must talk to each other and give reason to what we are doing, so that at the end of the day, we go along together. People of South Africa, in their majority, have voted and they want progress. And they will be watching the space, who behaves how in the mandate they give, that you work together.
Yeah, what do you guys think? Really brilliant speech. I really enjoy his demeanor. You know, the IFP party boss has a really calm demeanor, really mature. I really feel a mature spirit that really wants peace and, you know, progress for the entire South Africa, you know. And although being positioned in a much more neoliberal, you know, ideological space, even though it has fragments of indigeneity in its approach to development planning, I believe that the Inkatha Freedom Party really has this commitment towards whatever it takes that can move South Africa forward as a nation, in spite of its many wounds across its history. But in this video anyway, I thought to have this analysis, you know, to go through the historical event that really, marked a divide between the IFP party and the ANC in history, and really get us to understand why the IFP party boss here, Velenkosini Hlabisa, really believes that the government of national unity is an effort at reconciliation with the ANC, but also an effort at reconciliation and sparking a wider reconciliation for the wider South Africa. So I found a really interesting report on the Washington Post, which actually wrote about this event, and I think this was a really interesting historical perspective to the event, and it's titled "The ANC versus the Inkatha: An Anatomy of a Slaughter." Okay. So it speaks about how, it began as a personal feud in one of South Africa's numerous black working men's hostels. Maybe an argument over a property or a woman, or maybe something or someone that got drunk, local residents actually reported. It says that it ended in deaths at least 9 people, and at least a certain more bloody battles in the spreading warfare between supporters of the African National Congress and the Zulu-based Inkatha Freedom Party. So here we see that the IFP boss, Hlabisa, actually gives the numbers in this video on the people who were murdered on the ANC side and also on the IFP side. Okay. So it speaks about how that, the enclave, this hostel area where this whole debacle began, the enclave in the sprawling black township of Soweto had been spared the horrors of the political power struggle between Inkatha and the ANC, South Africa's largest black nationalist organization. The precise spark that led to the killings is unclear, but all versions come down to a story of Zulus and Xhosas, members of South Africa's 2 most prominent tribes, coming to blows again. So it speaks about how the recent understanding of the clash between the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Party, although it took place within the confines of the hostels, the working men's hostels in this region in Soweto, it's actually an extrapolation of a historical tribal conflict between Zulus and Xhosas in South Africa's history, and it's actually just taking a new face in the light of modernity, but it's actually a replication of this historical debate. So it speaks about how the result of the incursion, the result of the violence, was that 40 or 50 members of the Inkatha, which is widely perceived as the Zulu party, went on a murderous rampage in and around the hostel, apparently targeting supporters of the ANC, sometimes called the Xhosa party. So in other words, this historical framing of a tribal conflict between the Xhosas and the Zulus were actually now replaced in the auspices of political parties. So the political party, the ANC, even as much as it fought for the freedom of the Black Liberation Movement in South Africa, it was widely perceived by much of the Zulus as the Xhosa party, while the Inkatha Freedom Party, and probably now we see that the MK party actually seems to be accruing much of Zulu nationalist supporters. The Inkatha Freedom Party was actually widely perceived as the Zulu party. So although we see this as IFP versus ANC, and they'll be coming together now to form a government of national unity with the DA and the Patriotic Alliance, we see that there's a wider perception of the fact that the Xhosas and the Zulus are actually the ones trying to form a government of national unity with the DA and the Patriotic Alliance, and let's see how that works. Really interesting. So it speaks about how police arrived sometime after midnight on that day, but did little to order, peace, to restore peace and order. According to local residents and police officials themselves, they said that by then, 9 people had died, including 1 woman. Now, it says that by mid-Tuesday, so the incursion started on Monday, on that day. So by mid-Tuesday, the counter-offensive had begun, as hundreds of youthful revenge-seeking ANC supporters mobilized and surrounded several dozen or so Inkatha members still holed up in the otherwise abandoned hostel. As fitful peace efforts were underway, a group of the ANC youths penetrated the hostel compound and hacked a Zulu nearby to death. A handful of policemen fired bird shots and tear gas to drive the invaders away, and eventually enough police reinforcements arrived to escort the trapped Zulus to the questionable safety of another hostel nearby. This report actually argues that, probably the police was also involved in this debacle. So it speaks about how the move of the Inkatha Zulus to another hostel was questionable, okay? But anyway, it speaks about that the incident was typical of scores of others taking place these days in South Africa's densely populated industrial heartland as Inkatha seeks to expand its power base to traditional ANC strongholds in the black townships around Johannesburg. At least 70 people have died in the fighting since last weekend, more than 600 since the start of the year, and more than 6,000 since the ferocious battle began 5 years ago in Natal Province, the ancestral Zulu homeland. Now, he speaks about how ANC leaders charge that the flames of the violence are being deliberately fanned by South Africa's white minority government and elements within the state security apparatus. These forces are only too happy, the ANC says, to see Inkatha trying to weaken the ANC and to make it appear that South Africa's blacks are incapable of governing themselves peacefully. Pressured by its grassroots supporters, the ANC has begun forming self-defense units to fight back, while Inkatha is establishing warrior brigades that often operate from working men's hostels, the flashpoint of much of the recent violence. Now, to be close to employment sites, thousands of single black men live in tiny, cramped rooms at the hostels, which seem to have become Inkatha's bridgeheads in towns, long dominated by the ANC supporters. The one in this northwest corner of Soweto is simply called Number 2 Hostel and consists of a series of single-story barracks housing about 500 workers from a variety of ethnic groups. The fenced hostel compound is surrounded by small, well-kept homes in what is regarded as a middle-class neighborhood. Now, watching the bloody ANC reaction to the hostel killings unfold, an observer quickly got the impression that such events develop helter-skelter and that no authority acts to bring them under control until violence breaks out. In the end, Number 2 Hostel stood empty and ravaged with only losers on all sides, Inkatha, the ANC, and the surrounding community. Now, it says that the absence of any ANC or Inkatha leaders to deal with their followers during the 5 hours that tensions built to a crisis on that Tuesday morning was striking. Even more so was the almost casual indifference of policemen who stood by watching as the ugly scene developed. Someone says, we are waiting for something to happen, said one smiling white policeman as he sat idly in his patrol wagon. What this particular incident illustrated was how the police, wittingly or not, ended up helping Inkatha by intervening to save its warriors, and how in the process they made more enemies among ANC supporters. So this report is actually indicting the South Africa Police Force for also, contributing to this violence between the ANC and the IFP by its support, wittingly or not, for the Inkatha Freedom Party, and this has caused a deep divide between the ANC and the AFP, and that's why now the IFP boss Velenkosini Hlabisa is actually fighting, trying to really show forth a really spirit of commitment to the government of national unity proposed by the ANC to serve as his effort, the IFP's effort at reconciliation, because this divide actually keeps South Africa stagnant at the place, economically and politically. But anyway, this research speaks about that as the standoff lengthened towards noon, police began escorting terrified non-Zulu hostel residents back to their rooms to retrieve their belongings. But outsiders had begun looting other rooms and shops in the compound as well. An old fin-tailed Chevrolet parked inside the compound was suddenly set ablaze, and youth outside began throwing stones through hostel windows. A man named Mtembu, who identified himself as a leader of the Inkatha warriors, said he had no intention of leaving the hostel, but that he was trying to prevent more bloodshed. If I let my men loose, they will kill a lot of residents because a lot of them, who are the warriors, are just children, he said through an interpreter. Across the street, nonetheless, more and more pro-ANC youth were gathering and preparing for attack. Performing the toyi, a traditional dance of defiance, and being anointed with muti, a potion that is supposed to ward off enemy bullets, spears, and knives. Other youth were erecting crude barriers of stones and rubble on the road around the hostel, apparently to prevent police armored cars and vans from helping the trapped Zulus. Finally, a police colonel reached the scene, and with the help of an ANC party official who had come to see what was going on, peace talks began between the two sides. But in the midst of negotiations, and even as more policemen were arriving, a band of youth broke into the compound and began battling with the Zulus. Some of the youth fired handguns, prompting the police to respond with shotguns and tear gas. The only visible victim of the brief skirmish was a Zulu who had been struck with an axe and now lay writhing on the ground, vomiting blood. His Inkatha colleagues seemed only mildly concerned about his faith, while the police offered no medical attention. A local photographer helped him roll over so that he would not swallow the blood. But the wounded man lay there for about 2 hours before an ambulance arrived to take him away. Finally, a deal was struck. All Inkatha members would leave the hostel and the compound would remain empty, at least for the night. On Wednesday, anyway, it was decided that the two sides would meet again to seek a peaceful resolution. As today came, that's that Wednesday, however, number 2 hostel stood a silent, empty, airy shell with only a few policemen on guard outside. There was no sign of mediators from either side. About a mile away, meanwhile, Dobsonville's much larger number 1 hostel was in turmoil. The evacuated Inkatha members from number 2 hostel had gone there to seek protection. And much of the same thing as had happened Monday was happening again. Inkatha members were driving all non-Inkatha residents out of their rooms and off the compound, reportedly killing 2 people, and robbing others in the process. At one point, a brief 3-way shootout broke out between police, Inkatha members in the hostel, and pro-ANC youth outside. This really seems like a movie right now. It says, and riot police made a sweep of the compound in search of guns. One victim of the shootout was Abraham Tolo, a 59-year-old man who happened to be visiting friends at a house across the street. He was killed, the friend said, by a bullet from a hostel window. Asked what had happened, one man said, we were all standing here by the fence, and this poor man came out with his friend to go to the gate to go home. Before he could reach the gate, we heard this loud noise, a bullet from the hostel. Tolo's body was wrapped in a rug and placed in a nearby squatter shack until someone could take it to the morgue. So this is the unfortunate event, and the unfortunate happenings that seem to have been happening between the Inkatha Freedom Party members, supporters, and ANC supporters. We saw in a video recently going around social media about another skirmish between ANC supporters and EFF supporters somewhere in town. But it's really unfortunate anyway that these are kind of like the issues going on at the moment at the grassroots level in the townships, and that the government of national unity now seems to, it's really tricky if the government of national unity would escalate these tensions at the ground or really find ways to bring peaceful resolutions to what's really happening on the ground. But we can only hope and really pray and really have confidence in the speech of the IFP party boss Hlabisa here, as he speaks about how he has unity, that this GNU formation now would really begin the process of reconciliation between the IFP and the ANC, and hopefully that voice of reconciliation at the provincial and government level would reach the ground where a forceful motion for peace would help begin to reconcile this historical tribal divide between Xhosas and the Zulus. But what do you guys think? It's been a lot of information here. Share your thoughts in the comments.